So welcome everybody to our second breakout session. I think we've got quite a lot to discuss, and what we're going to be talking about in this session two, in the Dream 2 for the launch of Textiles 2030, is getting to grips with measuring carbon emissions reduction for the textile sector. So we've got a lively panel with us and lots to discuss. I'm just going to start off with a short introduction to the things that we want to talk about this afternoon. So the main aim for this session is to think about how carbon footprinting, particularly thinking about Scope 3 products and services, can be used to inform good decision making, and how will signatories to the new agreement Textiles 2030 be able to use that measurement to align with other initiatives in the textile sector and inform decision making within their businesses. So how can we work with other initiatives to reduce the burden from reporting, make it as easy to do as possible? I've got with me two signatories from businesses with experience of reporting carbon emissions and tracking carbon emissions from their business. And we've got sector experience from Leeds University and from Textile Exchange. Each of the panelists will introduce themselves shortly. First of all, just going to take a quick look at some of the evidence base for this work and the background to it. So in particular, and this might seem like a bit of a technical place to start, but we wanted to look at purchased goods and services for a reason. So what do purchased goods and services mean? For the textile sector, this is all about the product that is being placed on the market. So it's about clothing, it's about textiles products for the home in particular. And there are some other categories here as well. These all come within Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions. So we're including also transportation and distribution. We're including also the impact of products once they're in the home. So emissions related to things like washing, drying, and ironing clothing. And we're including the impact at end of life. So when items are disposed, what happens to them next? That's within the scope of measurement for Textiles 2030. And of course, this is important because we're going beyond the business's own emissions related to the buildings that it runs and related to perhaps transport for business, to look at the impacts from the products themselves. And for textiles, that's a huge part of the emissions. Now, to borrow some data from a well-known sports retailer and brand, this is published for emissions for a well-known sports clothing retailer, and looking at their breakdown of their greenhouse gas emissions from their last year's sustainability report, we've got around 20% of emissions are related to customer travel and their own business travel, and related to their own operations. And that operations and site construction is just 3% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. And the rest, around 80%, is coming from those products and from activities related to the products. So we know from the UN Fashion Charter, Fashion Playbook, that around 79–80% of emissions being related to the product for textiles is typical. That's what we should expect. And so that's why we're focusing on the product when it comes to measurement. So what can we do and how can measurement help us? Well, we've got quite a lot of experience of working together to identify activities, actions that we can take that combine to reduce the total impact. And by working together, through collective action, through as many signatories as possible, reviewing those actions and introducing them in their organisations, we've been able to see a gradual increase in uptake during the period of the last 10 years in the UK through the Sustainable Clothing Action Plan. So this is a list of the improvement actions that we've been including in the Sustainable Clothing Action Plan and the numbers of signatories taking them during the course of 10 years. We're looking to see a really rapid increase in these figures in terms of the numbers of signatories taking action in Textiles 2030, and an increase in terms of how far through those businesses those actions go. So what extent of the products that are included are those actions applied to? I haven't got a lot more to say today. I think the panel really have far more to share with you and far more interesting things to say than I do. So this was a quick introduction of what we've been doing so far. And this is a snapshot of what we think can be achieved by really ambitious and fast movement on those actions going forward. So what we need to do includes, as we've seen already today, a mix of actions that involve decarbonisation of the sector, working both in the supply chain and in the UK to decarbonise the energy supply. But we also need further take-up of improved fibres. We need much better production processes. We're looking at a really that within the context of a number of different actions that also need to be taken. Recycled fibres, reuse, and improved product design so that products can last longer. So this is just one possible pathway that could get us to a 50% reduction by 2030 from where we are with a 2019 baseline. Okay, so I wonder if my panelists would like to introduce themselves. Could you tell me who you are, what your organisation is, and your role in that organisation? So what is it that you're doing in that organisation that makes measurement particularly interesting for you? Could we start with Claire, please?
Sure, good afternoon. So my name's Claire Cunningham and I work on To Clothing at Sainsbury's. I sit within both the sustainability team and the fabric team within Sainsbury's, having joined them about 3 years ago. And I guess the biggest insight for me is, being able to see what we can influence from from a product level in terms of really making these changes within sustainability, and how whereabouts in the production of the fibres and subsequently the garments these pinch points for carbon emissions and water consumption are. So my role focuses around looking at those, identifying those, and sort of implementing movements and initiatives within our business to sort of drive those figures down, I guess.
Thank you. And Liesl?
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Liesl Truscott from Textile Exchange. Very nice to be joining this wonderful panel and with Sarah today, and looking forward to diving into the discussion. I'm the Materials Strategy Director at Textile Exchange, and a big part of my job is looking after our corporate benchmarking program. So I think there's some interesting nuggets and experiences I can throw into the conversation on metrics, really focusing in on the tier 4, so the cultivation and the raw material production. Are you hearing an echo with me, Sarah, or is it just my end?
A little bit of one, but it's not bad. I can hear you very clearly.
Okay, I'll keep going and ignore it. Thanks, just checking. Yeah, so focusing on the raw material production, both the primary and secondary raw materials, and looking at the sort of the contribution they make to a scope 3 in terms of climate and sort of carbon metrics, and then putting that in the perspective of what we now talk about in terms of climate plus, which is the interrelationship between biodiversity and nature, and greenhouse gases and climate change, and sort of looking at that systemic need to transform the way we operate, particularly at that tier 4 level, the raw production level, to really shift that scope 3 conversation into where it needs to head next. So lots more to talk about later on in the panel.
Thank you. And Mark?
Thank you, Sarah. And it's a pleasure to be in today's session talking about measurement. My role within the University of Leeds is providing the link point between what we do in terms of research and teaching, and making sure that we're on track in terms of linking up with industry. And as some of you may know, I've been involved in the 2020 agreement for quite some time, chairing the metrics group meeting. And within the metrics group, we've been talking for many years about the importance of measurement. And without measurement, it's impossible to know whether we are being sustainable or whether we're moving in the right direction in terms of some of the actions that we're taking. So I'm very passionate about making sure that we have the right measurement tools in place for Textiles 2030. And I think today's session hopefully will throw up some of the complexities that we have around how we measure things, but also throwing up some of the opportunities and some of the responsibilities that we all have in trying to drive the UK industry forward in terms of minimising some of those impacts that we have from a sustainability point of view. Thank you.
And Mickey.
Well, hi, thank you. Thanks, Sarah, and hi to everyone. So I'm Mickey. I work for the F&F team over at Tesco. And so my role at Tesco is Sustainability Manager. So I work really closely with the fabric team to develop a strategy for our sustainable materials, and then work closely with them and the buying teams to implement it. So measurement is a huge, huge part of that, because it enables us to understand where we need to improve and where we need to change fibres. So yeah, looking forward to the panel discussion too.
Great. So I have so many questions, but I think the first thing that I'd really like to hear from people about is why measurement is important to them. And I started to get a flavour for that from the introductions, but why is measurement important? And I might circle things around again, but not necessarily in the same order. So shall I ask Liesl, could you tell us why measurement is important for you?
Sure, yeah, a good place to start for sure. And Mark really started the conversation. I think everybody today has probably heard the saying, you need to measure so you can manage things, and you can't manage things unless you've got some sort of measurement. And I think for me, I think the emphasis is on really being pragmatic, being as scientific and really committed to objective measurement, but realizing that measurement is something that's never perfect, and it's constantly improving. And I think from my experience, the more we attempt to measure and consult widely and have expert input, we can continue to improve those parameters that we're measuring against. And that's a really, really important part. And I would just also add to that, to back up, I guess, what I said about that constantly improving direction and cycle, is that a few years back, I remember when Caring sort of got up and said, we really need to know where we're sourcing from. We really need to understand, we can't be responsible unless we have some idea of where we're sourcing and what we're sourcing. And I just use Caring as one example that, it was probably maybe nearly 6 or 7 years ago when it wasn't really there was not the transparency or the expectation that a company knew where its materials were coming from. But for us, that's one of the starting points, is looking at what materials you're using. So just in terms of the importance of measuring, knowing what materials you're using, knowing what your priority materials are, and that could be by a volume scale, or it could also be from a high risk scale as well, and then having the methodologies to be able to standardize those calculations. And for me, and I guess for the way we look at raw materials and being able to measure impact, that very first step is to know the volumes of the materials you're using. And that way, a lot of the other metrics that I would probably say is more about the modeling, so the life cycle assessments, the getting to impact in terms of water and greenhouse gases and energy, is really about the modeling. But the closer you can get your uptake volumes, the materials that you use, the more consistent the methodology, and the greater the confidence you have in the volumes that you're using, and then eventually knowing the regions that you're sourcing from, the closer we get to being able to model those impacts responsibly. I'll stop there, Sarah. That was probably quite a lot to say. And
no, that was really good. And I think, as you said, Mark sort of said it really well. Mark, tell us a bit more. It's impossible to know whether we're on track without having measurement in place.
Absolutely. And one of the key things I think that we need to focus on is remembering that this idea of sustainability is part of a business plan. And every part of business, we measure things. So sustainability is no different from that. And I think Liesel's made a really important point there about knowing what our materials footprint is. That has got to be the starting point. And I would actually argue that any chief exec or any chief finance officer who doesn't know what their material footprint is isn't doing their job properly, simply because about the financial implications of commodity prices changing all the time. So, there's a really important point that we're talking about here about understanding what materials we're using so we can then work out our sustainability footprint. But I know from my experience of working in the industry over the past few years that when material prices start spiraling out of control, if you don't know that you're buying 50% of your material is cotton and that price is going up, then you're not managing the business properly. So I guess what we're saying here is we have to treat sustainability as a key function, as a priority within that business mix, as we treat every other aspect of business, whether it's sales, whether it's volume, whether it's profit. And we have to have some sort of, hopefully what we're going to see over the development of the Textiles 2030 movement is that those metrics and the nuanced approach to how we do those measurements will improve. And we'll be in a position where we can get some really good granular detail that comes out to make sure that everything is, that we've got really clear and precise measurement.
Thank you. So some really good points being made by Mark there as well. And I wonder, Mickey, can you tell us a bit about how measurement is used in your business and informing decision making?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I absolutely agree with everything that Mark and Liesel have said about understanding what materials we're using. Without having that information, we're not able to know where we needed to start focusing. So for us, we were members, or still are members, of the SCAT 2020. So our journey started quite a while back, before I even joined F&F 5 years ago. So the team had already done a lot of work around, what are our biggest fibres that we use, and we know as a business that cotton for us has the biggest impact on our water and our carbon footprint. So that was where we were able to start targeting different areas. And it's not about, for us definitely, it wasn't about saying actually we need to do all of this, but really breaking it down and seeing where we can make the biggest impact. So the way that we report and measure, we're able to see which suppliers for us provide us with the most amount of cotton, and then we were able to work with them directly to start reducing that impact, and then sort of looking at different product areas. So instead of trying to tackle it all at once, actually we were just focusing on small chunks to help us on that journey. And I mean, in the beginning, it was really hard, and I would say to any new business that has joined or is about to join, it is really scary to begin with, but actually once you get into it and you start getting that information and seeing that data coming through, it is really, really valuable. So I would just say absolutely continue, just don't give up, because it will get easier. And yeah, I mean, that information that we get from the reporting side, it just makes it easier to have those conversations with buy-in teams, with our leadership team as well, for them to understand the impacts. It's really, really important for us.
Thank you. And Claire, give us some examples of the work that you've been doing as well in this area on measurement. Okay, sure. So
where to start? We, just to echo what the others have said, really, I guess, just as a sort of a starting point, we needed to have access to the same sort of data about our fibre tonnages and so on, so we could develop a strategy on how we move forward to have the biggest impacts, and to also understand the impacts of what we're already buying. And a lot of the tools that SCAP provided, which I guess will transfer into Textiles 2030, were crucial to developing that awareness and that knowledge. And we've been able to identify, I guess, as Mickey said, for F&F, that cotton is our biggest fibre, and we can subsequently look at the areas within cotton that have the biggest sort of like outputs of water consumption and carbon. So we've really been able to focus on tailoring our efforts in those areas, and just sort of being aware of what's going on, like Mark said, within that commodity, within the wider industry as well, and looking at sort of alternatives to I guess conventional cotton. So a lot of my work was centered around gathering all that information, looking at our sort of like garment consumption, and using the SCAP tool to just sort of bring all that data together. And the guys at SCAP, or SCAP, have really helped me, supported me to bring all that together. And the output has been fantastic. It's been really, really useful to see all of that data available. And like I say, to be able to implement it to sort of drive our sustainability goals as a business, and deliver what our customers want from us now, as well as supporting the business on their sort of like net 2040 sort of like carbon challenge. So yeah, it's all been really worthwhile. It's like Mickey said, it was a challenge, but there was a lot of support from SCAP to get to where we got to. And now sort of the foundations are down, we're able to move forward with that and really delve into the detail, and hopefully make some really big changes going forward as to sort of our fibre consumption. So yeah, I think really like sort of data is key, and awareness of that is, it's really powerful tool.
Thank you, that's really good to hear, and great to hear also from Mickey about gradually getting better at measurement, taking steps to improve. So fantastic. I am really looking forward to the next 10 years, but there's so much to do. How can we align the measurements for the new voluntary agreement with all the other initiatives there are? Because there's a lot going on in this space. Mark.
That's a nice, easy one to throw in my direction. Thanks, Sarah. Big challenge. And of course, what we don't want to be doing is spending all of our time and resource trying to remeasure and trying to duplicate what's already out there. So it's really positive that the Textiles 2030 movement have been talking about, as part of the advisory group, for example, have been talking about leaning on and using data that's already out there, that's already available, and also working closely with other organisations that have a lot of experience of doing this sort of thing. So Liesl and the Textile Exchange, we've got the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. There'll be others like the ZDHC, for example, who we might be touching base with as well. So it's building on that, and actually being greater than the sum of the parts will actually deliver what Textiles 2030 is all about. And I think, it's fair to say that SCAP 2020, when it started, was very much focusing on measurement. But really important, it was about measurement and action. So we learn, we understand, we measure, and then we take action. So it is really important that when people are talking about their engagement with Textiles 2030, yes, it's going to be complicated. Yes, some of this stuff is going to be quite difficult and challenging internally within organisations. But the fact that we've got a really good starting position in terms of levering and working with other organisations, I mean, we should be in a position where we can actually move really quite quickly towards those challenging but achievable targets that we've set for 2030. And I'm hoping that, with that balance of pragmatic approach to how we do measurement, but also that robustness that we had within SCAP 2020, will put us all in a good position to be able to sort of see some quick progress in the early years of this agreement.
Thank you. And Liesl, tell us about how we can work together and align measurement for the new voluntary agreement. Give us a priority if we're gonna kind of align on anything. Where should we start?
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely key for people like Mickey and Claire that are responding to a lot of surveys, a lot of information gathering, a lot of reporting, and I know Mark mentioned it a bit too, but the whole conversation around how to build consistency in reporting, but how to build more ease into it as well, and the most important thing is, as Mark said, is how you use that information that comes through the reporting, how that adds value, so that Mickey's team and Claire's team can go and sort of plug those learnings into the next cycle and sort of just keep using this information in a way that really drives value for the organization. And I think that's a conversation that's going around in the ESG community, the environment social governance community more broadly as well, harmonizing reporting, because we do need it to track that progress and to some extent keep everybody accountable. If we're going to put out big ambitious targets, which we have to do, we don't always know how we're going to get them, is what I'm hearing from some of the companies that we speak to. But we've got to be ambitious, and then we've got to find the way to do it. So to answer your question, it is going to be about that collaboration, that sharing and exchange of information, and hopefully the technology as well. PLM systems, tools like the SCAP tools that are helping companies plug their data in and drive, consistent measurement that can be used across an industry. So we're getting ease of use for the company and good valuable data. We're getting that level of transparency, and then we're getting some sort of comparability. And I think there'll always be, everybody I think has already mentioned it, that this is an evolving topic, particularly back at tier 4, at the farm level, at the forest level. What's happening in India will be different than what's happening in Tanzania or the US. It's a bit, probably get a lot of shocks, so sort of complaints coming back. But I would argue it's slightly easier inside a factory where you've got, to some extent, a square box. You've got something coming in and something going out, and you can apply the renewable energy and efficiencies in a more consistent way. It's still a big challenge, but I think at the raw material end, the more consistency we can get, the more collaboration, the more we can make the reporting easy, make sure that drives performance improvement, it drives accountability, and the technology that we can all start, in a few years' time, hopefully there'll be, interfaces between systems. There'll be, more of that embedded impact metrics maybe running through PLM systems. Hopefully that will help drive things as well.
That sounds great, and I think so. I think we've seen the future. I'm going to wrap up now. We've come to 4 o'clock, which is the end of this afternoon's sessions. So a big thank you to all of the panel. Thank you, Mickey, Claire, Liesl and Mark. Wonderful contributions. This session today and all of the earlier ones as well have been recorded. So they'll be available live on, well, not live anymore. They'll be available recorded on the Underline platform after the event. And so if you missed anything or you want to watch it again, you'll be able. Thank you, everybody.